And so I'm new to the Jesuit world, and so I'm starting to listen to more and more podcasts, and I found the AMDG, right?
Hmm.
Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Which I know is an abbreviation for something, and I haven't memorized it yet.
Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the
There
greater
we
glory
go.
of God. Yep.
Oh, look, I'm wearing that shirt. I
Oh,
should
wait
have
a
known that.
second. What does it stand for?
Yeah, right. Um, so anyway, I heard your interview and you talking about your podcast, and I was just really intrigued, and I was inspired by what you were sharing, and intrigued by it. So I'm glad that you could be a guest on it. Um, will you talk about your call to the priesthood? Because you entered the priesthood a little bit later, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Kind of right on time for me, which was nice. But I joined at 32, so I would have been out of school for about 10 years. And I had discovered the Jesuits because I'd gone to Gonzaga here in Spokane, where I now currently work again. So I came up here to go to college, but primarily to major in theater because I'd always wanted to be an actor. And I grew up on a cattle ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and so the idea of being an actor was contrary enough to be attractive to me. So and I have a lot of older siblings. And so a lot of spots were already taken, and when you're younger in the family, you're like, well, I don't want to do any of that stuff, mainly because it's already taken. And and I had always wanted to be in the theater. So I did as much as I could prior to going away to college and then came here and studied theater and English literature. And I had kind of always wanted to be a priest, whatever that meant. I mean, I didn't grow up in a particularly Catholic culture, which is probably a contrast to Detroit, where there is certainly a Catholic culture. And but Eastern Oregon, no. Oregon is where everyone went who was sick and tired of organized religion, historically, and so and then Eastern Oregon is even more rural, and so it really was filled with everybody that didn't want to be part of anything. So we were Catholic, but in a very sort of matter of fact, thin, culturally thin sort of way. And but I wanted to go to Catholic college for whatever reason, so I came up here, and then I got a theater degree, and then I moved to New York. So I was in New York and Seattle back and forth for about 10 years. I went to acting school in New York, and then worked both places, Seattle and New York, and then ended up in Seattle, and then slowly kind of it reemerged because I thought I was having to make the choice of being a theater worker or a priest, and I couldn't quite figure out how to do both of those things, or I wanted to do both of it. I don't know if you know the Enneagram very well, but
Oh
I'm an
yeah,
Enneagram 7, which is you would like to have all of it all the time. Uh,
right.
so more, please.
I have an
Gluttony
Enneagram
being
7 daughter, so yes.
yes. So you're familiar. Gluttony for everything all the time. So in any event, I was living in New York and prior to the last move to Seattle, and I was living in New York and I read The Seven Story Mountain by Thomas Merton, and I thought, that's it. I want to be a silent monk. That's it. And maybe it was because it was in contrast to living in New York at the time. But so that kind of sparked my interest in religious life. So I looked at the Trappists for a little bit. I went on a weekend with the Trappists, which I just disliked intensely, which gave me lots of good information. Because, like, it's one thing to read about people being quiet, but they're really quiet. I mean, really quiet. And I thought no. And so I thought I was done with that. And then I still I was already in a program that was kind of lay ministry sort of thing because I was trying to figure that out. And so I looked at the archdiocesan priesthood, and that wasn't quite a fit either. But I was still kind of working with, if I don't like it, then God will like it. If I'm miserable, then part of my misery will make God happy, which is crazy when you think about it. But I was like, I don't really want to be a parish priest, but maybe that. And then luckily I was disabused of that by the archdiocese itself. They're like, I don't think this is right for you. And I was relieved as I walked out of that interview. I was like, oh, thank God. Um, but then it still just was hanging around. And I was in a small ministry group with finishing this 2-year program of lay ministry. And this guy said, well, this is my last meeting because I'm going to go study. I'm now a seminarian for I think the Diocese of Spokane, actually, even though I was in Seattle. And I remember being so angry. I thought, wait a second, why does he get to be a priest? And I thought, well, I guess it's not quite done yet. So I called the Jesuits up and sorted that out and figured out that that was the right thing to do. And in part because well, they didn't lie to me, but they said, sure, I mean, Jesuits do everything, whatever you're good at, why don't you do that? So if you want to work in the theater, come work in the theater. Um, that's kind of been true, Joanne, but not entirely true, because yeah, I continue to be asked to do a whole variety of other things because there's a lot of needs that pop up. So, but it's
Yeah.
been really a great fit for me.
Yeah. So you're the campus minister there.
I'm a campus minister here,
Oh, got it.
just part-time. I'm here 2 days a week, and I started here in January. And I have done in the Jesuits, I've done a whole variety of things, including campus ministry at one point when I was first ordained. But then I was a pastor of our parish down in Hollywood. I helped relaunch the Catholic Student Center at Boise State. I worked for
Hmm.
the Jesuit Conference in the Bronx, so
Wow.
I kind of done all kinds of, I was the vocation director, all kinds of different work, as well as, starting a bilingual theater company. So a whole variety of things. But now I'm a campus minister with a university ministry team here at Gonzaga. And so what the campus ministers do is they provide spiritual support for the students and sometimes, depending on the staffing, faculty and staff as well. So we work within the mission and ministry division of the university. So
Uh,
our work is an extension of the work of the Jesuits with the university. I happen to be the only Jesuit in campus ministry or
oh,
university
interesting.
ministry. There's a bunch of other guys that do other things, faculty and staff, that sort of thing. And so my particular work is working in liturgy because with a background in performance, I like doing that and have capacity for it. So that working with retreats, student liturgies, a lot of leadership within groups of students. So I like it. I also serve as the young adult minister at the local Jesuit parish. I also
Oh,
serve on the OCIA team there as well. And that's what I do. That's separate of my work with media. So, but my
yeah.
primary work is producing Catholics in Ordinary Time and writing Substack with the same name. So it's
Oh,
about
wow.
Catholic culture. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really become your main um, focus, or what takes up most of your time then.
I'm trying. It certainly has the capacity to do that because there's lots to do. Because, for me, I have always been inspired by my notion of St. Francis Xavier,
Yeah.
which was, available to large missions and available to whatever the new mission territory is. And it's not my original insight, but it seems like if we were looking for mission territory, the online digital world would be it. And so I was really inspired to work in that area.
Yes, this is definitely, I mean, podcasts have been around for quite some time now, but
Hmm.
I feel like they've been in some ways rekindled after the pandemic, Um,
Hmm.
People who maybe hadn't really embraced them before are now looking at this as, hey, this really is a mission field and we need to
Yeah.
treat it as such. Um, so, how did the podcast then come about? Because you've been doing this for a little over a year, right?
No, I've been doing it since January.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mhm.
So how did this come about then?
Uh, when I was finishing up my work at the Jesuit parish in Hollywood,
Mhm.
Blessed Sacrament, I was there for 3 years, and then the society decided to withdraw from that parish after 110 years.
Wow.
And so I got to be part of that, which is challenging. And then I took a few months off to try to understand how I was being called to whatever was next. And my benevolent overlords allowed me some space to ask that question of like, well, what's the spirit doing next, in me? Because it wasn't quite clear to me. It wasn't clear. I didn't think, oh, this is what I want to do. Because missioning in the Jesuits is always a conversation between like what's moving in the man himself, and then what are the needs of the Jesuits. So we kind of go back and forth on that. And so within that, I thought um, being inspired by this digital space, but also inspired by the synod, trying to figure out the listening of the church, how the church listens. And in that, you have to really take seriously that the Holy Spirit is still working in the church, that it didn't just finish up and call it good, that, there's still the movement of the Spirit. And sometimes we're not great at, well, we're never really great at listening to where the Spirit's working, because we look in the same old places and find the same old answers. So why don't we open up to a larger piece? So my intuition was, because when you go online, you see a lot of spaces of the church talking to the people, but it's kind of a one-way conversation often, and that's fine. So that's handled. Also, it sometimes tilts very much in one direction online. And again, that seems just that part of the church seems to be covered, which is good. But I wanted to ask a question of like, well, how would we actually engage the conversation of regular Catholics? Because that's where we're going to find the Spirit moving. Because historically, that's always happened in the church is whatever becomes the center was started out on the fringe, started out on the margins. So we're well served to actually go out and listen at the margins as much as we can. So with that in mind, I thought, well, how do we start doing this? And I'm learning how to do it too. So there's my own learning curve. I built a podcast a while and learned how to do it during the pandemic because I had the time, which was interesting to do. And I've done a lot of writing work and a lot of journalism sort of stuff, and a lot of performance. So I have some of those capacities or skills, but learning how to do a podcast was new for me, and producing it as well. Which arranging, as you well know, all the arranging or organizing of it as well. So within that, I thought, well, where are my questions? Because my podcast is all about, I mean, it isn't titled as such, but it could be, my whatever I'm curious about, really, because that's how my interest is. And since the church is so big and so diverse, I could figure out whatever demographic seems interesting to me. And I continue to be interested in the experience of young adult Catholics, like what's going on there, And my question is, in the first season, and I talk about seasons just thematically, a thematic series, because it seems to make sense to call it a season. And so the first season was about young adult Catholics, why they stay and then why they leave. So to try to get a broad range. And so I was trying to get as diverse a group as possible, men, women, ethnically diverse, uh, in trying to understand those experiences. So that informed that first season. And in part because I'm interested, and also I do a lot of work with young adults, so I know a lot of young adults that I could speak with. And also, it's hard when you just start a podcast to get someone to come on a podcast because you can't say this is what I'm doing because they're like, I have no idea. So you have to like build on relationships you already have rather than referring them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I know this one's fairly new. And I had done one in my previous role for about 3 years. And this is a very different, I mean, that one was all on specifically on women clergy who are ordained and they're calling that. This
Mm,
is obviously a very different bent. And uh, so I'm starting all over again and
yeah.
with very, very brand new relationships with people. So so when I emailed you, I'm like, what? He's not coming. Is he going to want to come on this podcast? So, but since you have a new podcast too, you were gracious to me.
Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
Um, yeah, in that first season, interviewing young adults, why they stayed, and you also place a um, significance on listening. So will you talk about I'll get back we'll get back into the content a little bit more, but
Mhm.
first I want to talk about this idea of listening today in the church and its significance, because you mentioned that a little bit, rather than being the one who's just putting out information, you're almost like um, trying to bring in information and
Yeah,
by
correct.
listening.
Well, I think it's more how I understand myself in that conversation. Because I think that some people are in conversation, and this isn't just to the purview of clergy, but it depends on how you think about yourself in the conversation. If you think your responsibility is to impart information or to give people a lot of unsolicited advice, that's fine. And that's how you understand yourself in that relationship. And that might be accurate, it might be useful, it might not be. But I see myself, my my heroes in the podcast world are ones that do a lot of listening, that want to know more about what's going on. So, you know, yeah, I listen to Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan is talking a lot, and that's fine. And he's actually a good interviewer. But I much prefer like someone like Sam Fragoso on Talk Easy, who is, really interested, or Terry Gross, or, people that are really like you want to know more, you know?
Mhm.
And so that's what I would like to do. Also, I have some background in community-based art, which is trying to go into community and building a piece of art because you listen to people's stories and you built a piece of art, in my case, theater or performance around their stories, trying to understand them. So trying to build techniques in which people feel to establish an environment in which people feel comfortable enough to share what's going on in their lives, out of which then we build art. And so that's basically the same thing that I'm doing. And I just am much more interested in them than I am in me. I just like, okay, I already know parts of myself. I wouldn't say all of it, but parts of myself, and I'm interested in them. Yeah. And the church continues to try to do this conversation of listening and speaking, listening and speaking, listening and speaking back and
Yes.
forth. And sometimes it gets out of balance, but so it's nice to be on the listening part.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's nice to sit back sometimes and listen and not have to have the answers.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
super nice. And as a priest, sometimes, well, often you're kind of shoved into a corner and people want answers all the time.
Right.
People want to, and I think it can be kind of disfiguring to the priest himself because he feels he has to, or it's his responsibility to come up with an answer. And if you're not inclined to say, I don't know, or that's a new phrase, uh, then being a priest doesn't necessarily isn't a great space to learn that. So
Yeah. Um, so in season one, thinking about the content for season one and season two. In season one, I know that you were focusing on young adults, and in season two, you're focusing on queer women.
mhm,
And so, talk about a little bit about the season two content, and then I want to kind of
mhm.
ask you about what you're learning by listening to them.
Sure. So season two is specifically queer Catholic women who have remained in the church. So it was interesting to me because there's every opportunity to leave the church for all of us all the time. And not because the church is a mess. It's not any more than a mess than it's always been, or how big organizations try to survive and go forward and to do their work. I mean, it's beautiful and a mess at the same time. But it's my experience that, when you look around or you're working within the church, that there's maybe more opportunity, more off ramps that's seemingly for queer women within the church. That often women see it's clear that they don't have as much, their voices aren't going to be as valued in the church, sometimes institutionally. And then add on that queer women in the church, then it's even harder. So my curiosity was like, why do they stay? And that's the question I wanted to ask. And
Yeah.
that's what inspired these conversations and the entire season.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give it away because I know you haven't launched your episodes yet, but could you just talk a little bit maybe about what you're learning
Yeah, yeah.
from queer women? Yeah.
Well, one thing I'm learning over and over again, which is, people, in this case, the women in this series, people who remain in the church all go through the same sequence of, you may have been raised in the church, but then you have to make it your own. You have to engage the tradition on your own terms, and you have to see can it work? Can I find a place to flourish within it? But then that's not a question that's particular to one group. It's all of our work to do that, is to make the church your own. And how do you do that? So that is something that kept popping up all the time, of people saying, my interviewees coming to a conclusion of, well, that's fine if people don't think I should be in the church, but they're welcome to leave if they want to. I'm going to stay, which is good. Just like, yeah, that's good. Own it. And then also, a thing that I found really interesting and heartfelt was people choosing a range of ways to be. So I interviewed women who were identified as queer or gay or lesbian, however you want, however they would like to be, the individuals like to identify themselves, but within that want to live within the church in a particular way. On one end, you'd find people who really said, okay, the church says that I can't be sexually expressive in my relationships, so that's what I'm going to do. So there were women in that side, and there are women who said, well, I don't think it's just that everyone else gets to discern who and how they want to be in the world, sexually or partnered or otherwise, and yet queer people can't. And they came to that conclusion of like, no, no, I'm called to be in a relationship, so I'm going to do that. So there was a broad range of people. And so I'm familiar with the second one of people just getting on with it, but I wasn't as familiar with people who decided. I had one really interesting interview with someone who has decided to remain in the church and to be in a vowed friendship relationship,
Hmm.
which was kind of resurrecting some notions in the past about how same-sex people can be in relationship in a privileged relationship or exclusive relationship that's not sexually expressive. And tell me more, which is, usually usually my attitude towards things anyway. I remember being in philosophy studies, and every philosopher we studied, at the end of it, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next philosopher who'd say, that's all wrong, and I was like, yeah, it's all wrong. And then the next one, I was just like, which makes me maybe a better interviewer than a philosopher, honestly, because I'm just interested in people.
Yeah. Yeah, they want fosters want us to narrow one down and just
Yeah.
just pick one. Like, but they're all good. So which is a little bit of a contrast, or maybe it's not really a contrast as much as it is season two is a little more nuanced, right? Because you're not just talking about gender, but you're also looking at sexuality. But in season one, you're looking more at young adults in general. And some of them were raised Catholic, but others weren't, right? Is that correct? That you
No,
were interviewing?
yeah, some of them weren't raised Catholic. All of them were baptized as children.
Got it.
Yeah, and then I think there was one or two that then weren't particularly raised. Yeah,
Yeah.
Catholic.
Were there any from season one that in particular do stand out that you'd like to share more about?
There's a couple that stand out just because they represent a wide range. So I was glad to interview someone who is pro choice and a
Mm.
Catholic. And I was, because I didn't feel I'm not in that position to, argue one way or the other about, whatever the person's, doing. And it was so good to hear more from that person because as I, as I tell people, this podcast is kind of built for church leadership, if that's my target audience. And I'm not here to come to conclusions about what church leadership knows or doesn't know, but it's really interesting. And the same with season two is that the church is filled with a lot of different people. And it's also filled with pro-choice Catholics. And I think we do well to listen to what they have to say and how they make their way towards what it is they decide. Because this interview is with a lovely person down in LA who's the mother of two little boys and uh, works as an actor and uh, very articulate. And, it's just really good to hear someone say, this is why I believe what I believe, and this is why it's important. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those conversations are going to be are important today going forward in the church, and then also um, making space because the reality is we do have people sitting in our pews who
Mhm,
fall in that category, and so just understanding where they're coming from and their perspective
mhm.
and why they
Yeah.
would fall into that category. Um, Now I know, have you finished recording season two? It's just
Uh,
starting to, yeah,
mhm.
okay. So have you started brainstorming yet for season three?
Yes. So I'm building season 3 and 4 at the same time, and they need to
Oh,
sketch out season 5. So
oh wow. Okay. So can you
yeah,
give us a sneak peek of
sure.
season three?
Yeah, season 3. Season 1 was young adults. Season 2 is queer Catholic women who've remained, and season 3 is converts. Why are people
Oh,
converting to the Catholic Church, or why have people converted to Catholic Church? And that I have, I don't know, we have 7 of those interviews done. So we're building pretty well on that. And then the season after that is people who've chosen to go to the families who've chosen to start attending the Latin Rite Mass,
oh, yeah,
and why and how did that work, and what inspired them in that direction, and how's it going?
right.
Um, that's really interesting to me, and so the idea that I have a podcast where I'm interested in talking to queer women who've remained at the church and young families who now go to the Latin Mass. It's good. It's kind of a wide
And it's
range.
definitely one end to the other of the spectrum, right?
And we'll see. We'll see. I think we as a culture, here I'm getting on a soapbox, but we as a culture, talk about polarization all the time, and I don't think we're as polarized as as we like to say, or we certainly are prone to say, because I find a lot more commonalities. So we'll see
So
if that's
just
true.
so maybe the reasons are similar, they just express themselves differently, or
It's
you
just
think?
yeah, yeah, and families are diverse. Families have a lot going on. Um, and then the season after that, I think, is church musicians, people that lead music in churches, because we all have an opinion about them. So why don't we hear from them,
Yeah, right.
which I think will be
Uh,
cool.
all right. Well, if you want to interview Julie, let me know.
Okay, good.
She's a Lutheran playing in a Jesuit church. So
See, that's the kind of stuff I want to hear.
yeah, right. How much? Let's go with this. How much of your theater background is really playing that role in um, bridging gaps and helping you with the podcast itself?
Having a performance background has been useful kind of across the board. And I would just like to say, as a plug, if you're looking to hire anybody, hire a theater kid, is all I'm saying, is because theater kids can just figure it out and make it work. And, which is really a good quality to have. So there's that. But then there's also, a real interest in the human person, in all its weirdness and complexity. To have a curiosity around that. It's very hard to be in performance, or in my opinion, as a theater artist, without having a bunch of curiosity. And I started out as an actor, and I liked acting, and I'm good at it, but I'm much better at directing and producing and creating projects, just because there's more scope for
Right.
that, and it's harder because it's very complex, building stuff that doesn't exist, but I like it more. So
Yeah.
it suits me as far as doing things like a podcast.
Yeah. So thinking about your role both as a minister, a campus minister, and then all these conversations that you've been having, um, is there something that you would like to say to parishes that that we need to consider and reflect on if we're going to really embrace the future generations?
Mm. hmm Well, a couple of things is that doing this kind of work, the reason I started with young adults is because the young adults would be more inclined, not exclusively, more inclined to use all range of social media. Great, with the exception of Facebook at the moment. But that so starting there, and so parishes that try to understand their their digital presence as important are already heading in the right direction. Uh, and one of the things that I found in this season that was helpful again was it's also a mistake to go too much the other direction, which is, oh, young adults, they just want to be online all the time. That's not true. There's plenty of young adults that are sick and tired of their phones and sick and tired of being online, and frankly, they want authenticity rather than, oh well, we live stream this, so young adults would stay at home and watch it. No, young adults are much more inclined to not watch it. I continue to hear from young adults who, because I would ask them, I was like, so what percentage are you interested? Is your spiritual practice digital or not? And the highest was maybe 20% as opposed to 80% in face to face. They're not all wrapped up in an app. They're sick and tired of that kind of interface as well. So,
Yeah.
but parishes have to have some piece of that, but not overtraining in it. And then also just eh, talking to those people that you have questions about. And if you're talking about them, you should be talking to them. If you're coming to a lot of conclusions about this group or that group, well, go out and actually ask some questions. Spend some time opening spaces where you can actually get to know them. It's kind of that the Jesuit um, approach or ideal, which is always challenging to me, which is rather than just serving the poor, how do you become friends with the poor?
Mm.
Do you have anyone in your friend set that is unhoused? Do you actually know anyone? And this is certainly challenging to me all the time too, because we get used to just our circle of friends who are very much like us.
Mm.
And then we lose track of how we could actually, reach out to those people that aren't like us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Wow.
Yeah, because I did this podcast during the pandemic in which I was living in the Bronx at the time in a
Mm.
particular area called Little Italy or Belmont. And so the podcast I was doing, which was, by the way, just horrible quality, called Belmont Voices. And it was me just figuring out the tech all the time. But anyway, I just did interviews with people in the neighborhood. So, people that ran stores or, worked in a coffee shop or whatever. And there was this one interview that I did with this guy who was an unhoused young adult who I would see all the time on my way to the subway. So I began to, establish a relationship with him. And then I'd say, what if I gave you $20 for an hour of your time? And we did an interview about what's your experience of being on the streets.
Mm.
And we did that, and his girlfriend was there on the street too with him, and we were all sitting on Fordham Road, which is a very loud part of town, and the audio is very there's a lot of ambient action going on. And it was super interesting because, he becomes a human being
Mm.
because I'm in conversation with him. He was a human being before, but he becomes a human being to me, you
Right.
know, and that was a really useful, insightful moment for me as well as a priest, but also as someone who's trying to capture these stories of people that are not like me. And then they turn out to be a lot more like me than you'd think.
Yeah. That's wow, that's great. Um, the when you talk about the humanity and I think that a lot of what you're trying to do in Catholics in Ordinary Time is humanize people
Mhm.
and um, help us to dig a little bit deeper instead of just making assumptions, but
Yeah.
put flesh on people. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's a longer form too. So it just takes a while for people to tell their story. Yeah. And then, I always have the question, not always, sometimes people ask a question about the editing and all the rest. And my goal is just to tell their story as well as possible. I'm not there to, you know, make anyone look bad or to prove a point on my side or whatever. It's just, no, I want to hear their story.